Hello and welcome to another Star Wars lore episode, and I really think that this one is going to be fun, because we are talking about at least one of my favorite things in the Star Wars universe, really big spaceships. Before we begin, I just want to say that there's been this crazy dog that's been barking pretty much non-stop all morning in my neighborhood. I've tried to close all the windows and stop the sound from getting in as much as I can. I'm also going to try to edit it out in post, but hopefully you guys don't notice it, and if you do, hopefully it doesn't bother you too much. I'm not going to give a formal gawkbox.com update today because I don't think the list has really changed too much in the past few days, but if you guys do want to try to get on the list, if you want to donate, go to gawkbox.com/Eckhart'sLadder where you can download mobile games, play them for free, and you'll support the channel by tipping me directly. Anyway, as I mentioned, today we are talking about very big ships, and specifically, we're talking about one of the largest and most extensive lines of Dreadnought, probably the most extensive Dreadnought line in Star Wars Legends, but which also seems to be making its way to Star Wars canon. And basically, just for those of you who don't know, a Dreadnought is essentially any ship that's over 5 kilometers long. At least that was the formal Legends description. Really, just practically, it's any very large ship, which really eclipses normal capital ships. You may be asking, why am I talking about Dreadnoughts right now? Why am I talking about the Mandator line of Dreadnoughts? Well, it all comes down to Star Wars: The Last Jedi. In the most recent episode of the Star Wars show, which, as the name would suggest, is the official weekly Star Wars YouTube show, they unveiled 2 new First Order ships. The first one was the new Gorilla Walker, and the second one was a First Order Dreadnought. Now, this Dreadnought has a very unique design. It's certainly very large, coming in at over 7 kilometers long. It's got 2 very large weapons, which are presumably for orbital bombardment, and it's got a space in the middle where it looks like you can dock a Resurgence-class Star Destroyer. Also, though this is off topic, I'm going to officially predict that this is not the only Dreadnought type that the First Order will have in the upcoming movie. I think that they've got something much larger planned. It's maybe perhaps Snoke's personal Star Destroyer. Anyway, to get back on topic, probably the most exciting thing for me as a huge Star Destroyer nerd and as someone who really likes Star Wars Legends is when Anthony revealed the name of the ship.
The Dreadnought is a Mandator IV class warship.
When he said Mandator IV, I wasn't sure if that was actually the correct way to pronounce what I say as Mandator or Mandator, or if the ship name was just very similar. I'm still not sure if his pronunciation is correct. I mean, when I see Mandator, I think of someone who gives a mandate, and I certainly don't hear any sort of Y sound, but StarWars.com did confirm that the new ship is a Mandator IV class Dreadnought. I love this, and as I mentioned, the Mandator line goes throughout Star Wars Legends. So right now I thought it'd be interesting if we took a look at that line, traced it back to its roots, up to its perhaps modern day Mandator IV. We don't know if all the ships are going to be the same, but we'll talk about that along the way. Alright, so let's start with the Mandator I, and this was a ship that was quite old, even by the time of the Clone Wars. This ship exists in both canon and Legends, although in canon it exists only as a brief mention in a novel. In Legends, its role is a bit more kind of fleshed out. But it's still not really a very well-known ship. We don't actually even have any official pictures of it, although much of the Mandator line does share, at least besides for the Mandator IV, pretty common characteristics. They're usually very humped-backed, although now that I think about it, I guess none of the Mandator ships actually have images associated with them, so I may at times use images from the Bellator class Star Destroyer, which, as I'll explain later, I think would have looked very similar. So the Mandator was a Kuat Drive Yards design, and as I assume the Mandator IV is, and as all the other Mandator class line ships were. And this would have actually been one of the largest, probably the largest actually, warships available during the Clone Wars, certainly the largest available to the Republic. However, not only was the ship quite old by the time of the Clone Wars, again 20 years old as I previously mentioned, but previous regulations actually limited the amount of weapons that could be placed on a ship of that size, making it really not super effective in any sort of real modern engagement. These regulations all come from the Ruusan Reformation, which I'll probably talk about in some later video, but in actuality really existed to kind of get rid of some discrepancies between the old expanded universe and what was, at the time, new Star Wars prequel canon. Also, I'm noticing as this video goes on, I am progressively losing my voice, so I'm sorry for that. It is worth noting though, and kind of interesting, that during the Clone Wars, 7 Mandator Is were actually used mainly to defend key sectors of the galaxy. I think that would actually be a really cool kind of idea for a comic book series or perhaps an episode of the old Clone Wars show, but we don't really learn a whole lot about it. And again, we have no images of what the ship actually looked like, and same with the Mandator II and the Mandator III, so if I do use any images, just know that those are fan representations, not official Star Wars Legends information. So after the Mandator I came the Mandator II, and this was essentially the same ship, just upgraded to modern standards and for use by the Republic during the Clone Wars. It was probably around the same size and the same dimensions. It was obviously wedge-shaped like any traditional Star Destroyer, but it was upgraded with better armor and better shielding so that it could fight the Separatist Navy effectively. And this is all Legends information. I should have mentioned. The Mandator II doesn't actually exist in any formal capacity in Star Wars canon, although given the Mandator I does, I'm sure that it will be brought in at some point. This ship would have signaled, although it was released during the time of the Republic, a general shift in the Republic and later the Empire towards very large Dreadnought type ships. The Mandator II would be the last Dreadnought of this line seen during the Clone Wars. At this point, the Galactic Empire would form, and Palpatine would begin the process of modernizing the Empire's navy. Now, it's pretty likely that some of the Mandator IIs that survived the Clone Wars most likely would have had some role, though probably just, given their age, patrolling sectors or acting as local defense fleets. However, the Mandator Line would make it to this generation in a big way. They actually had 2 new ships released, and it's kind of interesting because at this point the line actually diverges in a really neat way. So instead of just adding a 3rd entry to the line, they actually did do that. They had the Mandator III, but they also added the Bellator class Dreadnought. Each one of these Dreadnoughts is specialized in a different way, emphasizing certain design features over the other, but it allows the Empire to have some versatility when choosing their large Super Star Destroyers. Let's talk first about the Bellator, and if you guys think this design looks cool, you're probably right to do so because it was actually designed by Fractal Sponge, who we all know is very, very talented when it comes to designing starships. This is the first and perhaps the only ship of the Mandator line which actually saw real attention in Star Wars literature. I mean, the Mandator I and II certainly were relegated more to cross-sections books and reference guides rather than actually appearing in any sort of stories. The Bellator, or at least the ship that would eventually become the Bellator, first appeared in, at least I believe, the Star Wars Dark Empire series. We don't at that time get a name for it, we just see the distinctive humpback shape of the ship and of course the engines. The out-of-universe explanation for the presence of both the Mandator III and the Bellator comes from the fact that both ships had to be created to fix some issues with continuity, particularly around the size of the ship, so presumably both the Bellator and the Mandator III are meant to look pretty much exactly the same. That being said, the in-universe explanation for the Bellator is that it is a Mandator ship which focuses on speed and really strike capabilities rather than being some sort of lumbering behemoth like the typical Super Star Destroyer. At only, and I use only in quotation marks, 7 kilometers long, we can actually see that purpose exemplified by the design. We also see very numerous engines and tightly packed weapons on the surface of the ship. The Mandator III, on the other hand, was designed like a typical Super Star Destroyer, basically to be a weapon of terror and extreme firepower, and at 12 kilometers long, I think it's safe to say that it was those things. The Mandator III, like the Bellator, was a Star Wars Legends only ship, and it really didn't get a whole lot of attention or a whole lot of screen time. I believe that it only really appeared in the Essential Guide to Warfare, and really only as a brief note. Design-wise, the Mandator III would have most likely looked like a scaled-up version of the Bellator class Super Star Destroyer. There may have been some differences, but it most likely would have kept its humpback shape and just general appearance. That brings us to the Mandator IV, and this is interesting because this is actually the first, other than the original ship, canon ship in the Mandator line of Super Star Destroyers. It's not clear, at least to me, whether the Mandator II and the Mandator III in this new canon universe are the same ships that they were in Legends. I hope that they were, and that they'll be fleshed out a bit more because I really love the designs. And I don't think that it was an accident that they chose to make this new First Order Dreadnought a Mandator IV. I mean, they could have called it anything without tying it to a previous ship line. I will say though, just personally, the ship could not look less like a Mandator ship. I mean, it's completely flat, it's got no sort of humpbacks on it like we would expect, and it's got those 2 large hulking weapons at the bottom, which we haven't really seen before in the line, which suggests to me that the Mandator II and the Mandator III may perhaps get an overhaul in the new canon, or perhaps they will just be ignored. Interestingly though, I think it is probably a pretty safe assumption to say that Kuat Drive Yards probably created this new ship. I do wonder though, we've heard rumors from making Star Wars quite a while ago that the First Order will be getting a very large, what they called Mega Star Destroyer, and recently they said that this ship is not that Mega Star Destroyer. I wonder if, like in Legends, the Mandator IV will perhaps have its own Bellator, a ship that is much larger and much less specialized, because we see that the Mandator IV clearly is specialized for most likely orbital bombardment. It doesn't even really have very many point defense cannons with less than 50. Perhaps this Mega Star Destroyer will be a much larger ship, which kind of acts like a cousin to the Mandator IV. Maybe not similar in design, but based on the same kind of idea. I don't know, I would love to hear you guys think though. What do you think of the Mandator Line ships? How do you hope the new canon treats them? And what do you think about Disney's choice to include a Mandator IV in the upcoming movie? Also, of course, let me know what you think about this perhaps mysterious Mega Star Destroyer, which we haven't seen yet and which may not actually exist. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.